Hello there. There are good ways to learn and bad ways to learn. My name is Dr. Stuart White. I have an electrical engineering degree from Vanderbilt. I've gone to medical school and I've gone to law school. So I've done a lot of studying and taken a lot of tests during my time. What I've found over the years is that the more you know about a subject before you start the class, the better you do in the class. What I've discovered is that it's very important to learn before you learn. What that means is you try and learn about a subject before you take the class, therefore you have a good foundation that you can build upon. When the professor talks about material in the class, if you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to understand the basics, you can learn a lot more details about the subject. Think about when you take a final exam and you go back and you review all the material for the very first test. All that stuff seems a lot easier when you're reviewing for the final. Imagine if you could go back and retake that first test after going through the entire class. You'd probably get an A because all that is the basic information. With Learn Before You Learn, I'll teach you all the basics about a subject so that you'll have a great foundation when you start the class. Therefore, when you go to class, you'll already know the basics and you'll be able to learn a lot more details about the subjects because you won't have to spend time trying to understand the basics. Sometimes this is called reverse learning. That's where you watch a video about a subject the night before you take the class, and then during the class, you discuss the information and answer questions. Typically, students go to a class, listen to a lecture, and then work on problems later that night. This is a lot harder for people to learn. Studies have shown that by reverse learning, in other words, watching a video before you try and discuss a subject, it gives you a good foundation that you can build on. One of the things you can do is taking handwritten notes. Studies have shown that writing down your notes rather than typing them improves memory retention. I would encourage you to write down all of your notes during class and when you watch these videos. Then take a few minutes each evening to briefly skim over the notes and then again look at them first thing in the morning. This will greatly improve your ability to remember the things you've learned during the day. Sleep is also very important for retaining knowledge. Getting a good night's sleep helps you remember things that you've learned. During sleep, your mind processes all the things you've learned during the day, and that's when your brain puts stuff back into long-term memory. Exercise is also very important for learning. Doing medium or low-grade exercise helps the brain function and helps the brain remember things, especially as we get older. One thing that can really help you learn material is to take frequent breaks. You should take a break about every 15 minutes and at least stand up and look off into the distance. Every hour, you should get up and walk around for a few minutes. Go get a drink, go to the bathroom, do something to break up the monotony of studying. They've done studies where they gave people lists of numbers or lists of letters, and what they found is that people often remember the very first letter and the very last letter in a sequence of letters once read to them, but they have trouble remembering the things in the middle. So if you break apart your studying into small, brief study periods, you're much more likely to remember the things you learn at the beginning and the end of those short periods of study. Walking outside is very good for studying, and if you can look at lots of green trees, grasses, bushes, anything in nature has been shown to help with memory. So at least once or twice a day during your study time, try and get up and take a brief walk outside. When I was studying for the bar exam, I often made stacks of note cards for the different subjects. Then I would take walks and I would walk around flipping through the note cards and then looking off into the distance and looking at the trees and the grass and looking at nature, which greatly improves your retention of the material. The way we learn is by adding to what we've already learned. When you think about when you were a child and didn't know what a plane was, or a dog, or a house, you drew very simplistic drawings of these things. As you got older and you saw more and more examples of airplanes and dogs and houses, you would develop a much more detailed understanding of what these items were. You would learn that they can come in various shapes and sizes, but when you're an infant and a child and had not seen them before, you needed a foundation to build upon. Learning is a process of adding details and adding to what you already know. When you learn more complex subjects, going through college and professional school, it's great to have a strong foundation so that you can build upon that and add more detailed knowledge. This is the idea behind Learn Before You Learn. The primary idea is to first understand what the subject is about, just to have a broad understanding. The second step is to understand the various categories that go within a subject. For example, your subject may have 4 major topics. Once you learn those 4 major topics, then you may learn 5 or 10 subsections under each of those topics. After that, you then learn more details about all those subtopics. It's much harder if you try and learn all 50 subtopics right in a row. That's what they do in a typical course. They start at the beginning of the semester and they try and teach you all 50 subtopics straight in a row. It's very hard to learn that way. What I recommend with Learn Before You Learn is you learn in stages. You start with a foundation, learning the main concept of what the course is about. The second step is you learn the basics about the main topics in that course. Then you start to add various subtopics under each of the main topics. And then the final step is you start filling in lots of details about all of the subtopics. But you do it in a gradual fashion to build your knowledge, just like building a building. You have to have a good foundation. What I would recommend is start with these videos to learn the basics about a subject. Once you have a basic understanding of the subject, as well as some understanding of the subtopics, then eventually you'll want to get a review book and then start on that. Already knowing the basics about the subject will help you tremendously to go through the review book. That way you can study the review book before you take the class. After watching these videos, then going through the review book, when you eventually start the class, you'll feel like you're taking the class for the second time. Imagine how much better you'll do if you had to retake a class after already taking it the first time. That first test would be so much easier because it's all review material. You had to learn it in order to progress to the more detailed information later in the semester. When you go through the review book, make sure to take some notes. Again, handwriting your notes is much more effective than typing your notes. It doesn't matter whether you take your notes in an outline form on full sheets of paper or whether you take notes on individual index cards. The important thing is to write them down in your own handwriting and then review them periodically. It's very important to skim over them at bedtime and the next day after you take the notes. Then later, when you go back over them, you will have already seen them several times. It's much easier to remember things written in your own handwriting because your brain recognizes them. Another piece of advice is to read your notes out loud. By reading them out loud, that adds another sense to your memory. By reading them out loud, you're also hearing them in addition to just reading them. That adds an additional layer to help you remember your notes. Once you've finished the review book and you've taken some handwritten notes of the most important topics, then you're ready to make what's called a skinny outline. That's where you take your large number of notes and condense them down to a single page. On that page, you're doing this entire process in reverse. You're taking all the details and you're condensing them back down into a foundation. That's where you take each important topic and write it on a single line on the paper. That way each important piece of information is written on a single line on the piece of paper. Then, when you need to review your material, you can quickly read 1 or 2 pages of material which will encompass the entire class. If you can do this the day before the class starts and then throughout the class, you'll do so much better during the class.